All right, let's put these ideas into action and do the exercise for this section of the course. So we're going to use a rather common scenario here for the generic writer, which is giving the user the option to choose which output format they'd like to use. This is helpful for building workspaces that different people. It's particularly useful in combination with the FME Flow data download service, where you can basically build self-serve workflows and let the users choose which data format they'd like. The general scenario we're using here is that you're asked to give people data from your city's community map quite often, and people request different formats. It's not very good use of your time to be manually doing data extracts like that. And so you're going to build a workspace which takes data from a single source. In this case, we're assuming a fixed source of a geodatabase, and then lets them choose which feature types, so which layers they'd like to receive, and in which format. So I'll go ahead and go over to Workbench to show you how to do this. So we actually, let's see, we have the complete version of the workspace up here. We can actually just close that. That should already be showing, but we'll start from scratch for this workspace. So I'll just hit File New, or go to the Start tab and hit New Workspace to start with a blank one. And we're going to start by adding the geodatabase for the community map. I'm going to type in to quick add OpenAPI, just because that's the quickest way to get to the right reader. So we are reading from an Esri geodatabase, but there's many geodatabase readers in FME, and we specifically want this OpenAPI one because it doesn't require Esri to be licensed on the machine. So we're going to open that one. And for the data set, you can use either the web URL provided in the instructions, or we can navigate to a local file. I'll navigate to a local file just because it's generally going to be faster. So I'll show you where that's located. You can click the ellipses button to browse for the geodatabase. And then this will be located along with all the other data for the course in the C drive and then FME data. While Strigo is thinking about that, I'll go ahead and put the paths you can use in there for you. So when this is ready, I will select the geodatabase. In the meantime, it's worth noting that we're going to be setting up a reader feature type merge here. And so instead of manually specifying all the different feature types we might expect, we're just going to read them all in as a single feature type and use that. Yeah, I've seen this happen before as well, where when browsing for a geodatabase, it can take a while. This is, I think, a new record for me, though. Because, yeah, I don't know. It's probably not actually even Strigo. Yeah, this isn't even Strigo at this point. This is actually FME, which is hanging here, unfortunately. You have this issue a lot, eh? I wonder if this is something we might want to report. It's always a little tricky with these live courses because we're not always sure if it's the Strigo lab or FME that's causing problems, but I believe this is FME, and in fact, it's really just completely not cooperating at the moment. Let me just do a little lab refresh. Sometimes that does help if it is a Strigo problem, which I don't think it is in this case. This might actually be a task manager situation. I think so. I'm just going to crash or close Workbench here because that was not good. Okay, let's try that again. Okay, let's restart that. I'm going to hit new, add the reader. Okay, let's maybe instead of going to my computer, let's see what happens if I go up a level instead, because I'm actually pretty close to where I need to be. And if this doesn't work, maybe I'll have to paste. Okay, that was a bit better. So yeah, maybe don't click my computer if you're doing it this way. The data I'm looking for is here in community map.dgb. That's C FME data community mapping, community map.gdb. I'll select that. And then we do want to do single merged feature type. So again, we're instead of it, because we don't want to have to specify really all the different ones, we're just going to do single merged. So I'll click OK. And this will add a single feature type with a feature type merge to read everything in. Then I will add my writer, which is going to be a generic writer. So I'll type in generic. I'll make sure to choose the writer option. And I will write this. Let's see. The instructions say none. I guess we don't really need to worry about specifying that. So let's go and we'll just choose a default. Oh, you good? Yeah, you have to choose a default. I forgot about that. That's good. So we'll choose Esri shapefile. And we're going to use automatic feature type definition mode. Then we'll click OK. So this will add a feature type to our canvas. We can leave that default name there of new feature type. And then for geometry, this is where if you did want to restrict things, you could, but remember that the user might try to give you something that isn't compatible, particularly if you're using a generic reader. In this case, we know a bit more about our source data, so maybe we could do that. But what we're going to do is actually choose any here, and we'll basically just let the generic writer handle creating multiple data sets if it needs to. So if the writer doesn't support any mixed geometry in its feature types, it'll simply write out multiple instead, and it will append the name of the geometry type to it. So we'll just go for that. It's kind of the most flexible option. And then we'll connect these up. So one thing that's definitely important to note here, let me save quickly, is you'll see in that list of attributes there that there's quite a lot, and they don't all sound like they're from the same data set, and that's because they're not. These are all of the attributes that are present in all of the feature types for this data set. And that's there because we set this up to use automatic feature type definition mode. So it is basically saying, here's all of the potential schema I could expect. And it will write all of these out as well. And that's where you do get into some challenges with just using generic mode. This is where something you'd have to actually start to set up dynamic translations if you only wanted to write out the attributes that are actually present in the data that was read. So we'll talk more about that in dynamic, but for now, we're just going to kind of do a bit of a shotgun approach here and include all of them. So let's have a look at the user parameters that exist now. These are just default ones that exist after creating this workspace. So we still have the one for letting the user choose the source data set. Let's actually delete that. In this use case, we're assuming this is just being set up specifically for that community map geodatabase, and that's the only source data we'll expect. So we're not actually going to let the user change that. We will keep feature types to read. This is good because that'll let the user choose which layers they want. We'll keep the destination folder format or parameter as well to let users choose where to write the data. And then for format generic, let's have a look at that problem I was outlining before. If we double click this and you can see how to configure it, this is what the user would see when they're configuring it as well. You know, you can click more formats and you can see that you do have the choice of any format that FME supports, any file-based format that FME supports. So that's, well, I guess databases would be in there too. So that's not ideal because like we were talking about, different formats exist for different reasons. Probably don't want to try to write these down as point clouds. Seems to be my go-to example, but or raster or something doesn't really make any sense. So that default parameter is very flexible, perhaps too flexible. So what we can do in this workspace is show an example of making a slightly better version here by restricting the formats that are available. So what I will do is actually delete this existing format user parameter. Then I'll go to the manage user parameters section here under user parameters, and I'll create a new choice parameter by clicking the green plus and then choosing choice. And if any of this isn't familiar to you, I would recommend going back and making sure you do the parameters lesson. This stuff is also a little bit complex, but pretty important for working with generic and to some degree dynamic workspaces, is knowing how to configure user parameters. So we'll put in the name as output format, the prompt. So what the user will be asked to do is select output format. We want this to be published. We want the user to choose the value. We also need it to be required. So they will have to pick a format. And I don't think the instructions say to check this. I probably would normally check this as well, because we don't really want, I don't think we would have a reason to let the user specify the format with an attribute, but I'll leave it unchecked just because that's what the instructions specify to do. Now, what is shown here in choices, so we're clear, the value here is what's provided to FME. This would actually have to be what is called the format short name, which is FME's code basically for what format to use. So for example, for mapinfo tab, I remember it's my tab. And so then you might want something like that for the display, which is what the user sees. So user chooses from the display options, but the value is what's provided to FME. And this is handy because it lets you write a more sort of human readable version rather than having the user choose the short name. The problem is I don't want to have to remember the short name for all of the different formats I want to use. The good news is you don't have to. So I would recommend for this use case not to manually specify the values of this table, but instead to use the import button. And this is what I would normally recommend doing if you ever need to give the user control over a coordinate system or reader and writer formats, is use the import rather than manually specifying. It's just a lot easier and reduces human error. So I'll choose writer format since we are setting up a generic writer. And then I'll just go through and pick some common formats that might make sense for this use case. So I'll do Esri shapefile. So I'll just search down here and then check when I found the one I want. Oops. Do AutoCAD, DWG, DXF. That's the ACAD short name. We'll do GML. And we'll do mapinfo tab. That looks good. We'll click OK. So now, as that gets filled in, again, display versus value, the user will see the display. And that's what they'll be able to choose from. Should probably also give this a default. So let's choose shapefile as the default. And click OK. So now we have this new output format user parameter. Let's link that so that it actually controls the format. Remember, if you're familiar with user parameters, they can be created down here, but you also have to link them to a parameter to control it. So I'll find under the generic writer parameters, there's the output format section. Right now you can see this is just fixed, it's set to shapefile. So it's not really a generic translation. It's just going to write to shapefile every time. To make this generic, let's link to the parameter we just created, output format, and click OK. So now the user will be prompted to choose one of those four formats, and then the value that they choose will be provided to this parameter, which will control which format is written, which writer is used. There is an additional thing we should do here, which is that because we have a feature type merge on our reader, all of the features will be sent along here, and currently all the features will be written out to a single feature type. That isn't really what we want. We'd like to continue to preserve the separation of feature types when we write the data. And the easiest way to do that is to double-click new feature type to open its parameters, and we'll define a feature type fan out. And to do that, I will select here and Yeah, that's funny actually. I guess because it's unexposed, it's not appearing on here as an option to choose. But what we can actually specify is, is it listed in here anywhere? I don't believe it is then, I guess. Yeah, so we can just type it in. It's probably the easiest way to do it. We'll type in FME feature type. You could also expose this, I guess, with an attribute exposer beforehand if you wanted it to be available. And it is available when you search. This is looking in unexposed. But we'll put that in. So this is an FME attribute. You've probably seen these before. They're prefaced by FME underscore. Those are basically sort of internal FME attributes that it uses, but you can always use them yourself as well if you'd like. By default, they're all unexposed. So you can see them in the feature information window, but not in table view. And we're going to use FME feature type here. This is very helpful with feature type merges on your reader because it still preserves that information about what different layer or table your source data came from. And by setting a feature type fan out, what will then happen is the features will reach the writer feature type. There's just one writer feature type defined, but they'll reach that. And then FME will actually write them out to different feature types based on the value of this attribute. And the value of this attribute is the name of the original table. And so it will write them out to multiple tables, preserving their original name. This is covered in part 1 of advanced, or is it actually covered in basic? I forget, but it's in one of our previous courses. And so if you need more info on that, I would recommend completing that if you haven't yet. But we will set up this feature type fan out to make sure we preserve those different tables. So I'll click OK, and I'll click Save. And then let's try this out. I'll hit Run. You can see we're prompted to select a bunch of things here. So let's choose which feature types we want. I'll write maybe garbage schedules and libraries. And I'll choose maybe, let's stick with shapefile actually, just because I want to show something specific with that. And then we need to specify the folder. So I'll go to FME data output training and select that folder. And then additionally, because I've chosen multiple feature types, rather than crowding this folder with a bunch of files, let me just write this out to a zip file as well. And this is also would be a common use case, when you're using FME flow. So you might want to write to zipped files. Data download will zip it by default, but sometimes it's handy to write to a zip. So I'll just add that in and I'll run that. And so again, just to reiterate what happens here, we have a fixed format on the reader. It reads all the feature types into one stream of features, and then they get written out over here using a feature type fan out. So they get split back out into their component tables. So let's go ahead and have a look at the output. I'll click the Open Containing Folder button, and we can see we've written this zip file. And if we look inside there, we can see we've got 2 shapefiles. And this is why I wanted to write to shapefile, is to just show you we defined geometry any as the geometry type on this single writer feature type, because shapefiles only have a single geometry type per shapefile. FME has automatically separated them and added information about the geometry type to the name. So that's just like kind of a thing to note about allowed geometries with the generic writer. So there you have it. That is that generic writing exercise. Let me just check. Yes, so this is a great point, mgrup. And again, why you kind of need dynamic writing in a lot of the same scenarios you might want to use generic. If we actually inspect the written data here, I'm going to have to go in and I don't actually know if I can read it when it's zipped. So let me, well, actually, can I specify shapefile here? So yeah, one thing to note actually is just with generic writing, you're going to run into problems with the view written data button because FME doesn't actually remember or know what format you wrote to. So you will actually have to specify that. I forget if I can just put in shapefile here and read it both from the zip. Let me see if that works. Yeah, it does. That's good. So The problem now is that we did successfully write to a specific format and we separated the feature types, but what we didn't do is account for schema differences. So actually what happens here is both feature types have all of the attributes. So it's not really ideal. You can see they both have all of the attributes from all the other feature types. They have the ones that they have, and those have values, but they have all the extra ones, and those are all marked as missing. And so this is kind of one of the challenges with just doing generic. It's assuming that fixed schema, this schema is here, it's fixed, it's always going to write all these attributes because of how this works. But we can fix that with the dynamic approach where we tell the writer to be flexible about the schema and we define what schema to use when we run the workspace. So we'll look at that next. But yeah, great point. So that's an important kind of drawback to this workspace still. Okay, so that is the exercise. I've gone quite a bit over our break time. So what I would suggest doing, go ahead and take a 10-minute break right now until 10:20 a.m. Pacific, and then come back and work on this. I'll give you at least 10 minutes. I'll check in after that. We might need 15. So go ahead and do that, and I'll see you back in about 20 minutes. Let me know if you have any questions. Thanks.